Hello, everybody. My name is Olesja Lagašina. I didn't prepare a speech about myself. I'm a journalist, a philologist. I have a PhD in Russian literature, but I'm working in journalism almost for 15 years. And I'm going to talk about the local Russian media, common information space, and what is necessary to make our audience to feel at home, to be involved in the most important information and the political processes. I think we all understand here that the question of integration is all actually about home. But do Russians feel at home here? What do they consider their home? If the question is, where do you live? The answer is simple. I live in Tallinn, the capital of Estonia. But if we are talking of cultural space, the answer is not so obvious. It's not a secret, for example, that we prefer entertainment content from Russia, and it's quite impossible to create local Russian star. You can try, but the result is poorer. It's always a problem when a political party asks you, hey, do you know any Russian who is popular and could join our campaign? It's always a very problematic question because it's pretty difficult to find one. And that is one of the reasons because why the local advertisements are not as effective as it could be here. Just look at the picture and imagine. On the left, you can see Andrei Malakhov, probably the most popular TV presenter in Russia. And on the right, we can see Zhenya Fokin, a stylist and also a TV presenter, who is more popular amongst the local Russians. I guess it's Malakhov, unfortunately. And let's imagine a 50, 60 years old Russian woman who watches an advertisement, sees the face of a local star who tells her actually nothing, and it just doesn't work. But for some reasons, Estonian advertisers are sure that they believe he is important for her. That's because Russian people with great pleasure watch Russian TV as it is in Moscow, because in Moscow they know how to play with my language, they know my cultural background, and I see faces that I know. It's so simple. So it makes me feel at home. The same is with the theater, for example. It's not a secret that our public prefers Russian guest performances to our local theater, so it always has financial problems. And we all see what is going on with our national broadcasting TV channel, ATV+. I think many of us have seen this famous graphic. Everybody knows actually that TV channel exists, but nobody actually watches. And its rating is always under 1% of the audience, except of periods when there is a football championship. And its ratings are always a subject of very cruel discussion, very cruel critics in Estonian media, including Postimees, unfortunately. Why do we have to pay for it if the audience has not accepted the channel? It's very usual to hear. For me, the answer is obvious. We have to pay for it because it has symbolic value. It is the way the Estonian national state shows its respect, its attitude towards minority, its attitude to the multicultural society. We do care, we want you to stay with us, and we are interested in what you're thinking about our common interests, common issues, our common life. Unfortunately, the meaning of this channel is not widely understood yet. The channel's reputation suffers of severe critics from the other media, including Postimees, as I said, and the last scandal in media was hyped up because of the citizenship of the newly appointed editor-in-chief, just because she's professional, she has the support of the colleagues, but she has also the citizenship of the Russian Federation. So those people who have no slightest idea of who she is, of what her political beliefs are, began to blame her, began to criticize, began to say that her citizenship is Russian, so it's unacceptable. And the hype was provoked by some right-wing politicians. We all know that elections are coming in March. So everybody tries to earn some political points. And it's really disappointing that they are trying to manipulate the media. And the media supports this hype. But on the other hand, for the Russian audience, it might be a good sign. You see, she's Russian, she speaks Russian, she's from Russia, she has Russian citizenship, so maybe this channel is not actually Estonian propaganda as I thought before. For many of us, all those scandals around ETV Plus show the real attitude towards minority here. Nobody actually interested in the fact that besides ETV Plus and ETV, national broadcasting has also ETV2, for example. Nobody knows who is the editor-in-chief of ETV2 and what's its rating. But actually, we don't want to discuss it. Why? Why we're always discussing ETV Plus? Because its rating is too low, or its quality is too low. No, I don't think so. I think we're talking about it because it's Russian. I beg your pardon if I'm talking too much, because if I'm talking too much about the TV channel, not Posthumous, just because the concept of the ETV Plus is all about integration. And Posthumous is a private company which has its commercial purpose as well. But actually, I think Russian media here has one serious problem in common. There is a lack of certain content segments, such as, for example, international policy analysis. We have little political discussions. We almost do not talk about foreign affairs, for example. It's very strange because there's no such a TV show at the moment for the Russians, local I mean. And if you think of Russian television, which is full of so-called analytical shows, and you know their ratings are really high. For example, the famous show of Olga Skabeyeva, Evgeny Popov, you see at the screen in 60 minutes. You can see it every evening on the channel Россия. Well, we all understand it's propaganda, but it's popular. It's a chance to talk about some political issues as well, international affairs. And I think that the ratings are high not only because it's actually very well done, but because Russian people want to be involved in a political process, and Estonian channels doesn't offer such chance. My own experience tells that people are interested in international policies, especially if we're not afraid to take the most controversial issues. Well, okay, when a Russian journalist begins to analyze foreign policy, it's always suspicious. No doubt you will be blamed that you are not a journalist, but a propagandist. No matter if it's Russian or Western propaganda, you can be both at the same time. Sometimes it even seems to me that our Russian journalists avoid certain topics because they don't want to provoke a conflict within the Estonian editorial. They don't want to gain negative attention in Estonian media, and maybe they're afraid that it may be unpleasant to the Russian audience. I think it's a mistake. To be credible, journalism must be brave, must be honest, and it must not avoid any topic, any issue. But you see, the Russian journalist in Estonia is almost always the other, as he's representing minority, as he has another cultural background, and obviously his concept of Russia is different. His picture is maybe not black and white as Estonian one, and he's always in the middle of the conflict. You have to communicate different points of view, and at the same time you have to create that common information space. But the crucial condition of this common information space is credibility, and then you have to have same values. Actually, I believe that Russian and Estonians in general have the same values, but there are many contradictions in details. For example, we all share the concept of the importance of human rights, freedom of speech, international law. It's all obvious. But we also see how differently, for example, democratic states react when they see a violation of those fundamental issues. For example, everybody have heard of the murder of Saudi Arabia journalist in the embassy. Now there's another one murdered, but nobody have heard of sanctions against Saudi Arabia. Well, we criticize it, but there's no practical consequences. We all can imagine the reactions if it had happened. For example, in Russian embassy was Russian opposition journalists. We all remember Skripal's case in Salisbury. and the consequences. We discussed it the whole summer. And we support the sanctions. I do support the sanctions, even if they have a negative impact on our economy as well. But we cannot afford sanctions against Saudi Arabia. Probably it would ruin our economy. So we write a couple of articles, we condemn the murder, and go ahead. It was not nice, but let's do not speak about it anymore. So, are we still talking about democratic values? Or we have to talk about double standards? On the other hand, when we criticize Western democracies for the absence of principles, don't we behave like Russia today? It's usually a problem. Is a Russian journalist allowed to discuss it without being accused in spreading propaganda? But our readers see that, and they do react. They want a discussion. Actually, I believe we have to discuss it, and we have to talk together on the most difficult topics, the most difficult issues, and we have to do it at the same platforms, no matter in what language. It's not enough that Estonian media is translated into Russian. It's not even enough if local Russian TV or online media has its own discussions. It takes two to tango, and if we want to create a fully integrated society, we have to build it up starting from the media, which can show that different opinion is possible, that everybody and every nation is treated equally, your nation is not stigmatized, and we're all ready to talk to each other. How many media projects in our media companies where Estonian and Russian journalists work together, do you know? There are actually a few of them, like Radar at Channel 2, for example, or Pealtnägija Insight at ETV+. But they're not political shows, it's investigative journalism. And we usually do not discuss politics together. We don't discuss economy together, and we almost have no analytics at all. It is certainly a problem of staff, a problem of money, financial problem. Sometimes it's a language problem because it's very difficult to find someone, to find speakers to your show. But it's also a problem of will, I think. Estonians and Russians might have analytical media projects together, which could be brought up together, maybe in both languages. Because if we don't collaborate in our media, what do we expect from the society? I think the common elections are a good example of the collaboration, could be a good example of the collaboration between the editorial teams. When a political subject is covered by a joint Estonian and Russian team, there's less chance of a usual deceit when a politician tells one thing to Russian audience and quite the opposite to Estonian. One of the best examples of such a revelation we had in Postimees a month before or so with Mart Helme from EKRE, Estonian Nationalist Party. He gave an interview to Russian Postimees and began to talk about specific Russian civilization, that Russians are more than a nation, that he would prefer to keep Russian schools, that we should not accuse Russia too often, etc., etc. But everybody remembered what he was saying before to Estonians, so it was very, very fun. And I remember this moment when the Estonians translated it, our colleagues, Estonian colleagues translated it into Estonian, so we could have a chance to compare the Estonian statements to the Russian ones, and it was really, really fun in our editorial team. Actually, I think that is a good example how this common information space should function. Because, you see, there's no chance to win the elections when your audience understands that you are lying. And you are doing it almost everything. There are a couple of such parties which likes to do it. There should be projects which are brought up together. There should be translation in both directions of the most important issues. But often there's a problem of resources, there's a lack of time, maybe planning could be better. There is collaboration in our editorial teams, but there could be more. And to be together, we have to make things together. I would really like if our national broadcast and television channels would show us political debates before the elections in two languages, with two hosts, Estonian and Russian one. It's not technically impossible, and you just have to show the will to do it. The collaboration between the editorial teams and the respect towards different population groups could improve the credibility and maybe media reputation. Fake news is not actually the most important problem. The problem is that sometimes we are ready to believe it. Researchers say about 17% of population doesn't believe mainstream media, so they prefer alternative one. And you never know who can manipulate it. For example, last Friday there was a fake in local Facebook group. Somebody posted a story of a girl who was raped and died in Mardo, a small town near Tallinn. Many reposts, many comments. Colleague calls to the police, controls it. Police tells it's a fake, so we publish it with a headline. The police disproves the fact of rape. Somebody publishes it in a Facebook group. So in a couple of hours, there was no hype anymore. Because you see, it's not usual that somebody rapes a girl in Mardo. We have no migrants there. We believe usually our police and our media, and there's no negative background in the media. We don't expect it actually to happen in Mardo. So it's easy to control and to calm down the people. And the situation could be very different in different conditions. For example, we read about a girl who was raped by a migrant in Germany. Shall we believe it? Okay. If there was a preparation, if you do not believe your media, if some problems exist, you may believe it. Everybody remembers scandalous Liza case in Berlin in 2016. Well, okay, it was inspired, it was faked and used by Russian propaganda, but it would not be possible without the context. There are three crucial moments in spreading and disproof of a fake. First of all, the context matters. Second, is there anybody who wants to use this situation? And third, you have to believe your media and your state officials. And here we come back to the problem of credibility. Do the people believe our media? Actually, they do, as researchers say. But it's not actually enough. And mainstream media itself sometimes discredited, destroys its credibility. For example, do Russians from Lasnamäe believe Estonian online media when it writes of their district in the most negative way? Here you can see on the left, for example, the classic example. Okay, it's just imagination, but sometimes we can read such an article in Estonian mass media that Lasnamäe is a ghetto, is populated by the people like that. And on the right is actually his actual picture. It's Lasna Kino, people watching a cinema in my district. So you see, no problem, no ghetto, it's all okay. But it's not the far right media outlet. It's mainstream. It's my own media, right, about all that. So when I read about it in Postimees, I usually begin thinking, am I right? Do I have to translate it or to publish it in Russian just to show there is such an opinion, just to keep our information space common? Well, I don't do it. Usually I go to my Estonian colleague, my chief, we're talking about it, and usually they agree that it must be edited, but it doesn't mean that I will never see such thing again. It's a problem. To build up an integrated society, I have to show some respect. And maybe it's better not to show some points of view too often, just not to propagate it, even if it brings you clicks, money, and cheap popularity. We cannot imagine a story in New York Times where black population is described in a most offensive way. In developed democracy, it's a fail. Here it is not. Media cannot be successful in building up an integrated society if special aspects of the target groups are not taken into account. This summer, Russian Postmates organized a panel discussion at the Festival of Opinions in Paide. We talked about the image of Russia in Estonian media. If you analyze the context in which Russia and Russians exist in Estonian information space, it will be Putin, Crimea, information war, hackers, fake news, Russia wants to manipulate US election and so on. Okay, it's all true, but I don't want to exist in such a negative information space. There's Russian culture, there's so many things to speak about. So, if we can create a comfortable, credible information space for everyone, the problem of propaganda and fake news won't be so serious. Alternative media is successful only when the mainstream has discredited itself. You can blame social media, you can blame foreign propaganda, but you cannot deny the fact that you provoked it yourself. So mainstream media is producing too much noise that people doesn't want to think, and it's a problem. It's not a problem of information space. It's a problem of common cultural space, and I think we have to create it. Thank you.